as I was saying, I really appreciate you being with us, being present for the 2024 People's Social Impact Conference presented by Setsi, the social economy through social inclusion. I'm your host, Ryan Knight, here to bring to you another enlightening conversation, this one touching on data and cybersecurity in the nonprofit sector and philanthropic sector. Yes, and I'll mention them and then have them introduce themselves. But just before I do, we always begin things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Again, we have a stellar panel, as I mentioned, joined to us with, you know what? I'm going to get some of the last names wrong. So I know we have Karen, Arlene, Liz, Charles, and Kathy. So I'll go in that order. First, Karen, if you could introduce yourself to let those know the great work that you're doing and a bit of your background.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Milligan. I'm the Executive Director for Ontario 211 Services, which for those of you who aren't familiar with 211, first of all, it's a helpline 24/7 providing navigation assistance to people who are seeking support for a variety of different needs that they might be facing or challenges they might be facing. So available 24/7, offering service in more than 150 languages through a teleinterpreter service. And at the backbone of all of that is a very comprehensive database of services across the province of Ontario. So our role is more of a system coordinator, system steward, to ensure that we are able to reach 100% of Ontarians and ensure that our data represents the services available in all communities across the province.
Lovely. Appreciate that, Karen. And I'll go to Arlene McDonald next. If you can give us a brief introduction and let us know about the great work that you've been doing.
Good to see you. Thank you, Ryan. Arlene McDonald. I'm in Mi'kma'ki on the northeastern coast of Nova Scotia, a beautiful coastal community. I work now for myself basically as a consultant, capacity for impact consulting, website and marketing to come. Nice. But most of my work over the last 30 years has been with charities and nonprofits as an executive director in organizations where I was the one and only staff person, right up to larger staff people. And most of my work now is focused on building capacity. So building capacity as a sector, working on those systems and regulatory and all of those things that either enable or challenge organizations to be able to do the work, as well as working with individual organizations and, you know, being privileged to see some of the really cool and innovative things that are happening in communities on the front lines, and just working with them to help to build their capacity as individual organizations to do the work that they're trying to do. So that's where I've been focusing the last few years and enjoying it immensely. So thank you, Ron.
Lovely. And it's a pleasure to have you with us. I'll go next to Liz Forsberg. Do you want to give us a brief introduction? And yes, let us know about the remarkable work you've been engaged in.
Thank you, Ryan. And it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today. So I'm Liz. I work on the partnerships team at the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And I'm not sure if there are folks from outside of Ontario here today, but we're an arm's length agency of the provincial government, and we fund across the nonprofit sector. And I lead a portfolio of partnerships that are working to cultivate a healthy ecosystem for data, learning, and action in Ontario's nonprofit sector. Not a data expert by any sense of the means. I actually arrived at the foundation from the arts and culture sector, where I was an AD of a community engaged arts organization for many years, and I got hired to lead the arts and culture strategy. And like fast forward a few years, and now I'm working in the data space. But I actually think that's not a bad thing to not be a subject matter expert, because I really understand context and how how these conversations are impacting those who are working and leading nonprofit organizations. I wanted to say I'm joining from Treaty 13 territory, Toronto, and I want to make a connection to data and data infrastructure here, because this territory that I'm living on, I have the pleasure of living and working on, is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And this is an agreement that was developed between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee to peacefully share and care for the land around the Great Lakes, just ensuring sustenance and life. And I was reading an ebook that Animiki published called Data Back. And it was talking about how wampums and wampum agreements were part of the complex Indigenous data systems of collective oral record keeping. And this wampum agreement really centers the principle of, it codifies reciprocity. And you know, if citizens of this land were actively engaging and representing or living the values in this, I think we'd be living in a much different place. So this principle of reciprocity is a huge theme that's coming up in all of the conversations that I've been having across the sector and with people on this panel around the data ecosystem for the nonprofit sector. So I wanted to just make that connection between that agreement and the conversation we're having today.
Excellent. I appreciate it. That's right. We appreciate you being here. So I'll go next to Kathy Barr, just to let us know a bit about your background and some of the remarkable work that you've been engaged in.
Thanks, Ryan. So my name is Kathy Barr, and I am currently, and for the last few years, Vice President Research and Strategic Relationships at Imagine Canada. Previously held other positions here at Imagine. I've been at Imagine since before it was Imagine. So since 2002, so I originally started working with the Canadian Centre for Philanthropy. And then when the Canadian Centre for Philanthropy merged with the Coalition of National Voluntary Organizations to form Imagine Canada, since then I've been working with Imagine Canada, or for Imagine Canada, and I'm actually located in Guelph, which is on Treaty 3 territory, between the Lakes Purchase, which at the moment is now is pretty much located around the first Six Nations Reserve in Brantford, but historically covered the land that I now live on. And my role, for those who maybe don't know Imagine Canada well or at all, Imagine is kind of the umbrella organization for charities and nonprofits in Canada, the national organization. There are other national organizations, of course, but Imagine is really the only one that our membership and our stakeholders include the entire charitable and nonprofit sector. And we do a lot of research and public policy activity for the sector as a whole, and a variety of other things. My focus throughout a lot of my years at Imagine Canada was actually research, conducting research on nonprofit organizations and various parts of the sector. For the last 3 or 4 years, probably 4 years, I would say, an increasing amount of my time has been spent on advocacy, primarily advocacy relating to data. So, and related data, and particularly data collected by the federal government or not collected by the federal government about the charitable and nonprofit sector.
Excellent. And I appreciate you being here as well. And we'll round it out with Charles Buchanan. You let us know.
Yeah, hi Ryan, good seeing you. Yeah, thanks for.
Hey, always good seeing you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. So yeah, I'm Charles Buchanan, and yes, I'm under a foot of snow in Lovett Treaty 7 territory, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is yeah. So we're going to be holed up for the next few days, and so a little bit of background. I'm a computer engineer. I've been out west. I'm a refugee from Toronto 31 years ago. And for the last 8 years, I've been running Technology Helps, which is an organization that's focused on, with a grand mission to end technology poverty. And by ending technology poverty, we focus on helping organizations that are in the nonprofit sector, charitable sector, social purpose and equity seeking. So we've gone beyond just helping the organized people who are helping the people, but the people who need our help, which is members and equity-seeking entrepreneurs. So how we do that through, these are systemic problems, and we do it through systems of support and the systems of security, which is cybersecurity for the most part, and support, which includes data and the effective use of data, which we'll talk about through this conversation. So happy to be here and look forward to this chat.
Excellent. And yes, we'd love to start with you to give a bit of context to how you tackle this mission with approaching data in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. What's your perspective on how we should be approaching it?
So it's sorry, it's very dry here. So how we should be approaching it is the good thing is 8 years ago when I started this work, and that was my first brush with nonprofit. Like, I came from a long corporate career and jumped into nonprofit thing, not with the assumption that we could fix everything, but it was the state of data in the sector was horrible. It has not improved a lot, but data is critical, and people here would be talking more about why data is important to basically gauge your performance, as well as to deliver and basically create programs that are appropriate for the communities that you're trying to serve. What's missing is that data collection, data collection and data use, and the whole concept of using data as an essential tool for social impact is not supported at the top level by foundations. It's not seen as it's getting increased in people are now seeing it better, but before it was like something that people would be expected to have and expected to do, but not have the resources to cover it. So it's improving, but we still have a long ways to go, and it's even worse for grassroots organizations that are expected to create programs, deliver programs, and articulate their impact without having strong data management fundamentals.
Okay, and I appreciate that perspective. And Karen, I'll go to you next, as you're talking about 211. So you must be collecting so much data from the community. I'm curious how you would put into context of how we approach this mission of data in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. And I think, first of all, I will stop and kind of explain the two buckets of data that 211 collects as part of its work, because the first bucket, if you will, is kind of the supply side of the equation. We collect information about all of the various programs and services available across Ontario. That would be the supply side. There's all kinds of improve that data collection, the maintenance, the updating, etc. But I'll park that for a second. The other bucket of information or data that we're collecting is when people are contacting us, we do collect information about generally demographics, age group, gender, what their needs are, where there are unmet needs, and of course, where we are identifying service gaps. So we aggregate that information at a provincial level. We can break it down by community, but it's non-identifiable information. Having said that, with more than 300,000 contacts every year to 211, the data can point to emerging trends, issues, service gaps in communities. So more and more, we're providing that data, again, at an aggregate level, to decision makers and planners to inform either their program and service delivery or inform their investments. Quick example is, local United Ways we work with really closely, and they're starting to use this needs and unmet needs data to inform which programs they invest in. So all to say, that's just kind of defining what the buckets of information are from a data perspective. But of course, we also play a role, I would say, in intersections between many different systems across the province, between health, between social services, legal services, community-based services, and everything else in between. And what we are constantly struggling with from a data collection and data sharing perspective is that the data is not all consistent, right? So data harmonization is a huge, huge issue. And especially in a system where the funding and therefore accountability lies in many different places, is very fragmented. So mental health services, for example, are funded by 5 different ministries just in the province of Ontario. And then you have those that are funded by groups like United Way or community foundations, or even like Bell Let's Talk type funding. So it's very fragmented, and trying to aggregate that data to actually sort of have a very solid picture of what's happening out there, both from a supply and demand perspective,
Right.
Is hugely challenging.
Excellent. And I'll continue on this trend of organizations that collect so much data, and I'll go to you, Liz, with Trillium. I was going to say OTF to make sure and say them out. So with the Ontario Trillium Foundation, I'm sure you're seeing so much data come in on what is needed in the community. So I'm curious to get your context on how you approach the data side and the collection of it in the work that you do.
So I'm gonna take a step back, and then I'll try to get to what you're saying.
Yes.
But in terms of the, through partnerships, we're looking at this ecosystem level. So as a funder, we're part of this much larger data ecosystem, nonprofit data ecosystem. We're part of this really complex environment of codependent networks and actors that contribute to data collection, transfer, and use. And certainly OTF is a large player as a funder in Ontario, but it also includes nonprofits, charities, all the intermediaries that serve them, government, other funders, academia. And all of us are playing a role in the production of knowledge and making sense of all of this data in and about the sector, through collection, sense making and use of data. And as a funder, we certainly collect vast amounts of data from our grantees, and I would say hoard that data. And I don't think it's inappropriate to use the word hoarding. We're also, so we have practices around data that are impacting this ecosystem, but we also funding, and we make funding choices. Some of our funding goes directly to organizations through grants that might be supporting some organizational infrastructure around data collection. And then my role is more around these co-created partnerships with many partners to think about data at the ecosystem level. And through our portfolio of partnerships, we're thinking about how that overall ecosystem is functioning or not functioning, and what investments we need to make alongside others at a systems level to support a healthier data ecosystem. But not only what investments, what are the practices that funders as a whole need to be changing as well. So we're asking ourselves a lot of questions. We're in conversation with other funders and other actors in that data ecosystem. And what we're hearing is a bunch of tensions that I think are really important to name in this space. And ONN and Philanthropic Foundations of Canada have done some great research reports. ONN released last June a framework for nonprofit data strategies, and this unearthed a lot of interesting observations about what's happening right now in this space. And so one, Charles and Karen have spoken to this. It's very fragmented and siloed ecosystem, and the players that are in this space are not aware of each other and the important work that's taking place. There's a real disconnect between academia and nonprofits, for example, and how we might be able to leverage some of kind of sense-making power to feed back into the sector, what this data is telling us. To function as an ecosystem that's aware of each other and understands that all the stakeholders are equal and important contributors, we really need systems coordination across nonprofits, academia, government, and funders. And that doesn't really exist right now. As funders, as Charles said, and I am in full support of his comments, as funders, we have historically underinvested in that infrastructure, and that needs to change. And we've been leading, or I shouldn't say, we were working with other partners to have some conversations, and actually Victor through Setsi and Cinder has been part of that. We're having really good tough conversations about what it is that we need to be doing as funders. What do we need to be doing differently? Certain players in that data and learning ecosystem, like funders, government, and academia, really hold disproportionate power and influence within the ecosystem. So we need to recognize that and address that in a meaningful way. And then also the one last tension, like the individual players within this ecosystem vary in data capacity, awareness, and readiness, which can really in turn impact their ability to understand and participate in the ecosystem itself. So it's not just nonprofits that may vary in data capacity, but even funders vary in data capacity as well. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
I appreciate
Thank you.
taking that step back to give kind of the landscape. And Kathy, I'd love to go to you because I find Imagine Canada is kind of that 30,000 foot where it can give reports on how everything interconnects, but it also is like at that grassroots where it lets people know where to find information. So I'd love to hear from you your perspective on the context of data and how it influences your work.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming to me next, because I think I can build like off what Liz was saying, which I wholeheartedly endorse every word of it. I think, and this is kind of for me where things are really becoming clearer in the last maybe year or so, is this strong need to bring together the various players, and the key players for me are the federal government in the form of particularly Statistics Canada, but also Canada Revenue Agency, because they hold some important data as well, but primarily Statistics Canada, to have stronger relationships with those bodies and with individuals in those ministries in regards to data, in terms of what's being collected and what's being shared and how it's being shared, and to the extent to which the sector is involved, the nonprofit sector is involved in making those determinations and having input into things. But also academics, as Liz mentioned. I'm a recovering academic myself. That was my life before I came to Imagine Canada.
Yes.
And I'm still involved in you never really leave academia, so I'm still involved in that a little bit with ANSWER, which is the Association of Nonprofit and Social Economy Research, and my involvement with the Masters of Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership at Carleton. So I think there are some important academic players, and Liz is totally right, they're not involved in these conversations, and they do have a lot of capacity and knowledge and skills that they can bring, particularly to the research part of it, as opposed to the data part of it. And then the other thing I'll say is that what we lack is the infrastructure to bring that all together. Like I personally think we need something like, and some people have heard me say this before, something like a nonprofit data lab or a nonprofit data center that becomes a center of excellence for all things related to data in the nonprofit sector. And this could include a center for coordinating with government, federal government in the first instance, but provincial governments potentially down the road. That is a center for advocacy in relation to data. Because I don't know how many people know this, but Statistics Canada is not mandated to collect data on the nonprofit sector. They are mandated to collect data on the agriculture sector, manufacturing, all kinds of other sectors. And you know what happens when government starts cutting funding? Who gets cut? The sector that is not, there's no mandate to collect that data. I am deeply afraid we are going to lose the gains that we have made over the last few years if we get a new government, because StatsCan's going to get their budget cut, and the first thing they're going to cut is things they're doing related to nonprofit data. So I think we need to be really strong on that advocacy piece, and we need a center for it. We also need more education and development, and that's another place where the academic community could help, because they're good at that. They know how to teach, how to collect data and use data and analyze data. We need to bring that together to make that training more available to nonprofits of how to use data, how to keep data secure, all those kind of things. And then we need a place to make, and this is maybe at the core of it, we need a place to make that data that is being collected by government and by ultimately maybe other nonprofits as well, the nonprofit sector, available to the sector to use in easily accessible ways, which is not happening right now. And we at Imagine Canada do try to do that as best we can, but we're not that big of an organization. We're like a $5 million organization that does 16,000 different things. So our ability to do that is limited, right? So like, this is why I think we need a center that's not Imagine, but maybe Imagine stewards it, I don't know, to bring all this knowledge together and really, because honestly, I'm coming to the end of my career. We've been talking about this for 20 years.
Wow.
And we need to actually do something and not just talk about it anymore.
100% valid. And
preaching done.
But I love, Arlene, if you can maybe continue the conversation to give us your context on the role that you play in this mission of data collection and how it can actually support community work.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far, especially Kathy, your points about, the necessity of an infrastructure, and, Liz and, 201, everybody's collecting so much information. We've got too many data points, Stephen, count available to us, but not really a structure to pull it all together, especially a structure that is in the sector where we can interpret it and make sense of it from the lenses that are important to us in the sector. I think that's one of the missing pieces, is we're still looking to government to collect, but also to interpret, to disseminate it back to us. And I think, that's a bit of an issue. But of particular interest to me right now is nonprofit data. So we keep using the term nonprofit, but what we're really talking about is charity data. And I'm living in a very small community where the number of nonprofits far outnumber the number of charities, yet we're using kind of our traditional systems of looking to the majority, looking to those charities, the people that we already have a relationship with. Charities have a relationship with federal government. So we go to the people we know, collect information on them, and then use that to determine what's good for everyone else. But in the nonprofit sector, where we don't have data and we're making, there's a lot of uninformed or ill-informed decisions, or taking someone else's experience and applying it, to a nonprofit whose experience isn't the same. I mean, they don't share the same in regulatory environment. They don't share the same fundraising ecosystem. We're trying to change that by loosening regulations on qualified donees, but a lot of larger foundations in Canada are choosing not to change their granting practices. And so we are taking this, brush and kind of painting everyone with the same picture. And I'm starting to become more concerned with what we don't know about nonprofits in this race to fill everything we know about charities. And so I guess for me, that's been bubbling and popping more and more to the surface. Are we actually unintentionally creating even more disparity by focusing so much on the gaps in one population and using those to try and describe what's happening in Nova Scotia, an even larger population? It's, it seems counterintuitive to the principles and values that we're trying to approach this work from.
And so not being able to really segment and focus in on different communities so that the data is more richer and useful.
Well, just saying that what happens with charity organizations is the same as what happens to nonprofits. And, there's provinces in Canada I haven't yet gotten to track and, really look at every single province and compare the charities to nonprofits. But in the 3 provinces where I have, nonprofits outnumber charities, but all of our decision-making is based on the experience of charities.
Gotcha.
Makes me concerned when we see more women and Indigenous and Black-led organizations in nonprofits.
Appreciate that. And I'll go to you, Charles, next. But one quick thing, I saw Kathy, you put in the chat a link to Statistics Canada releasing results about nonprofits. So those that are following along, definitely check that out for nighttime reading. But Charles, I would love to get your thoughts on what collaborations or initiatives would you like to see happening, or what are those that are currently happening that can really amplify the work that you're doing?
So yeah, so it's there's some good like there's some good things happening. Like I think we've had mention of Cinder and the idea of having a nonprofit data, a data lab or a place where nonprofits could, that would be important, because there's a lot of fragmentation, or they call it distribution maybe, but fragmentation of resources. So there's and it's not. I going back to funders and about how things are funded at the local level where collaboration is expected, but not necessarily. Collaboration is not truly funded. It's like, we want you to collaborate, but we're funding one organization. So Cinder is a good is a good starting point, and has great potential. And then even there's some like Ontario 211, for example, is actually a data rich organization. So we're currently in some of our work now, we're building a system for connecting people with emergency food across Canada. And and we will be, Karen isn't aware of it yet, but we will be looking at the 211 database, because they currently have the best, they're currently serving people who are looking for help across the country. Gotcha. So if we're trying to serve people needing help, I don't want to go ahead and build a database and create a data source when one already exists. So there should be, I think, if more people were to look at who else might be doing this work. That's a question we typically ask when I'm because I spend some time on the funding side as well at a grant table. And who else is doing this work? And are you duplicating work? When it comes to data, we should be asking that question as well. Who else is collecting this data, or who may have this data, or what do you need to know, and who already knows that, or who could you work alongside to augment that? It would accelerate your path to service delivery quite dramatically if we were to just but even knowing who's doing that work or what data they're using to do the work, we don't have that as a resource. So even if we don't have a data lab, just having, say, a data inventory, just say who's got what kind of data that we can even start with. And it might not be happening in your geography, but because if it's not geographically based, if it's information that might affect certain populations, or you want to, or healthcare, then yes, it could be anywhere.
Wonderful, and I appreciate that perspective. So Kathy, I'd love to come back to you just to go a little bit deeper. You mentioned the data lab, and what kind of collaborations or initiatives would you want to see that can really amplify either that being created or amplify the work that Imagine Canada is already doing?
Yeah, good question. Well, we have kind of in works to some extent. We've Imagine Canada is one of the founders of Cinder, the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience, along with Setsi and others. And we have certainly been having those conversations within the Cinder group about that, the ability that this is something that Cinder could promote. There's also the collaborative that Liz has mentioned of funders that are interested in this topic. There's been some conversations with that group. So the been advancing that goal, and others is one Arlene is involved with, which is the federal, as well as the Federal Nonprofit Data Coalition. So I'm not sure if, but that is a group is by Imagine Canada and the Ontario Nonprofit Network, but it now includes, I think there's more than 70 individuals and organizations that are now involved with that group. So it's gotten fairly large, and it includes both, charities, nonprofits, foundations, and even some government, some are part of it, and some sort of, and academics. There's academics that are part of it. I believe Ushnish, who's here in this group, is part of it, and some other academics. So it's starting to be a little bit of a a nucleus for this. It's if anyone's interested, it's absolutely like open membership. You want to join, you just join. You know, you want to join, send me an email at cbar@imaginecanada.ca, and you'll be there. That's all you got to do. The group has been we pre-budget submission. So for those who don't know, within the federal government, there's a whole pre-budget consultation process that starts many before the federal budget is launched. So the next federal budget is coming out on April 16th, but the pre-budget submissions were due last August for the pre-budget process. So you submit, it's a long, you got to be well ahead. We're already planning the 2025 pre-budget submission because it'll be due this August. And the Federal Nonprofit Data Coalition has now submitted 2. We've done 2, third if we. That's a very good way of getting specific asks on the agenda of the federal government. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it means your bureaucrats and government officials are going to be aware of what you're interested in. So that's one venue that the group has been pursuing to advance the advocacy piece with regard to data. Doing is currently we're in the midst of hosting a 3-webinar series. The first one's already happened. It happened on Monday. The next one is happening next webinars. Anyone can come. And their first one was focused on the data ecosystem, just the kind of things we're talking about here. And the second one next week is going to be specifically focused on Statistics Canada data. And then we're also trying to organize a third one right now that would talk more about data collection. So good data collection, storage, and use practices. So that one would be a little bit different, and we're trying to get that one organized right now. So that group is itself trying to play both an advocacy role and a bit of a capacity building role as well. So that's another, and anybody here is welcome to join that group.
Thanks.
Or attend those webinars.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the email, Victor. So Kathy mentioned it, but it's in the chat if you did want to join and send her an email. And so Karen, I'll come to you next to talk a bit about maybe some of the collaborations or initiatives that you'd want to see that could really amplify the work you're doing with 211.
For sure. And thank you, Charles, for sort of the mention of the kind of data that's available through 211 that some people are not aware of, but a lot of our work is collaborative because we actually are not providing frontline service. Our job is to make sure that people get connected to those services. So we, by the nature of the kind of service that we offer, we are in the business of collaboration. But I would say from a data perspective, there's a few different ways that this happens. One of which is I mentioned the resource data, or that very large inventory of 60,000 programs and services in Ontario. And to Charles's point, lots of people may not be aware that we have that data. It's updated regularly. It's very standardized according to a North American accreditation body. And we have created mechanisms to share that data with other nonprofits in particular. And a large number of government clients as well, but essentially so that people are not having to recreate the wheel. So, again, we've developed different mechanisms for sharing that data, including through APIs directly into specialized portals, such as, for example, a recent one developed by Canadian Union of Postal Workers for their families who have kids with special needs. So it's called their Disability Supports Portal. It is powered by 211, we like to say. So the 211 data is coming in. They don't have to worry about keeping that data up to date. All they need to worry about is the front end. So there's some of those types of collaborations in place. And of course, we make all of that contact data that I talked about available through a public dashboard on our website. And people can go in on their own and sort of examine what are the top needs, unmet needs in a particular community, or they can look at it at a provincial level. But on the back end, we have entered into some data sharing partnerships in terms of that needs data as well. So during COVID, a quick example, there was a group of researchers engaged in an initiative called How's My Flattening? And they were, some of you may have seen it, but they were measuring sort of case numbers and comparing that to the trajectory of where people were traveling to during that time, especially during lockdowns, and how that affected case numbers. So they expanded that at a certain point in the pandemic, wanting to look at the social impacts. What were we seeing in terms of, you know, the lockdowns and what that impact was on individuals in terms of food security, in terms of income support. Lots of people lost their jobs during that time, right? And so they started to map that in line with where we were seeing the case numbers increase, and was there any sort of correlation? So I mean, those were things that we, so just some quick examples of the kinds of ways that we're partnering with others. And most recently, somebody mentioned the research institutions, and we've partnered consistently over the last few years with the University of Toronto, and in particular their public health school, really looking at these intersections between health and well-being. And we have an intern from University of Toronto right now through their AI for Public Health program, helping us look at a potential recommender system based on, again, what people are asking for, but also what we know based on our experience as far as what kinds of services are people typically looking for in combination, or what might be some of the underlying needs that that person has had, or that person has, again, based on experience with previous interactions with help seekers. So those are just a few quick examples. And I think the last piece I will mention is we have a real desire certainly within our 211 world, to develop a concept that is known as the community information exchange. And it exists in a few different places, but even in Canada now, but began in San Diego. And the real concept there is sharing data of multiple service delivery partners at an individual level, so that we are connecting the dots for them, and that people are not falling through the cracks in between these service systems. So that's a big piece, and it's a huge initiative requiring an intense amount of collaboration amongst, you know, very, very different network partners, including big health players and very small community organizations. So it is a monumental task, but something that we would definitely love to see move forward.
Excellent. And I love how you explained how partnerships or collaborations could work with 211. So thank you. And that process, I don't know if that's on the website or if there's an email that people can reach out to. I think that'd be good.
I'll put something in the chat. I'll put a link in the chat for sure.
Appreciate that. And that kind of leads me to Liz. I think you're leading partnerships at Trillium. We'd love to learn more about what collaborations are already in play, or which ones you would love to see going forward that would amplify your work.
There's a lot of exciting work that's happening, and I just to kind of I can talk about some of the stuff that we're doing, but I want to build on something that Charles mentioned and then Ushnish kind of uplifted in the comments, and this idea of there's a duplication and people needing to navigate, you know, where to access data sets that may already exist, or where to access training that already exists. And one of the biggest things that we're observing in this like siloed ecosystem is that there needs to be this systems level coordination or navigation. And that is what I am kind of laser focused on right now, is how we it's not sure there are gaps, but there is a lot happening, but nonprofits need to know where to access and how to navigate that. And so it's that systems navigation, I think that's really important. And are, intermediary organizations are kind of best positioned to be able to do that? Is there an existing organization? Do we need to create a new organization in the way that Cinder was kind of was created out of this kind of gap to advance digital capacity in this sector? Just some questions I'm asking myself. But in terms of like existing collaborations that I think are really important, we've been, as I mentioned, kind of partnered with Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, ONN, Cinder, and Setsi to co-host a set of conversations with funders to talk about our practices, to talk about how we need to invest, how we need to be better players in that ecosystem for data and learning. And we're having some really good conversations. And now the next step is like, okay, we got to move to action.
Yes,
We need to put our dollars behind this. So that can be a slow conversation, but we're working away at that. And one of the things that I would really like to see come out of this is actually a fund for data infrastructure. And here, I think we have different funding bodies who are starting to fund data infrastructure. And in fact, some of the federal like COVID response funds that were kind of distributed nationally, there was a lot of money that went into data infrastructure, but I think there was probably a lot of duplication, and there could have. So how do we avoid some of this duplication? So this idea, and I know Victor is really behind this one too, of some kind of a fund for data infrastructure so that we could have a kind of a bird's eye view on across, like nationally, and start to do some of that coordination too. Something that's happening right now. OTF has teamed up with it's another, we're working a lot with Cinder and the Ontario Nonprofit Network and the Digital Governance Standards Institute. And we are going through a process of developing a data governance standard for human and social services data. There is a volunteer kind of technical committee that is advising on this, and then a smaller expert drafting committee. We're in the process of drafting this, and it will then be put out once there's feedback from this technical committee. It's going to go public for 60 days, where we will invite feedback on this standard. And this standard will be it's an evergreen document. It gets updated every couple of years or so, but it's going to be a place to start at for organizations to see what are the kind of best practices around governing human and social services data. How do we keep it safe? Or it's with funders about the ways that we need to invest in organizations to support them in being able to adopt this standard. So I'm really, it can sound kind of, a data governance standard can sound kind of boring, but I actually think that it could be really transformational for the sector. And I'd invite everybody here, once we get this out in public, to look at it and comment. We want this to be very usable social purpose organizations. And maybe one last thing I'll mention. We're doing some really transformative work right now with NABC, the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, and a new Indigenous evaluation network, addressing kind of ways of knowing that are embedded in what we view as data and how we collect it and make sense. The Indigenous Evaluation Network is the first Indigenous-led and Indigenous-centered evaluation network. It's going to enable new, emerging, and experienced Indigenous evaluators and program service providers to connect and network and build capacity, engage in mentorship, and expand the field of Indigenous evaluation by being a central resource and hosting networking opportunities to benefit Indigenous communities. And NABC is doing some amazing work convening folks around Afrocentric approaches to evaluation and systems change. Both of these partnerships will help shift this underlying Eurocentric mental models that are really dominating our approaches to data collection, sense making, and use in the nonprofit sector. And I think they will serve to really amplify the voices of Indigenous and Black data practitioners in the sector. And so we've talked about a lot of practical things, but these are partnerships that are addressing the mental models, which are kind of foundational to all of this work and the way that we approach it.
Absolutely. And I love that round, like holistic perspective. So thank you, Liz, for bringing that. And Arlene, I would love to go to you next just to hear a bit of the key priorities you're working with, and maybe if you have some calls to action for the audience as we begin to wind down the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. I'd really like to pick up on something that Liz said about what we know and how we use it, because I think it's really important. You know, we're determined to collect data, but I think we need to be just as determined to think about who's collecting it, how is it being interpreted, who's using it, who owns it, for what purpose are we collecting it. You know, when I look at data, I look at it as a way, for example, to make decisions, but also to monitor the decisions we've made. So we, yes, you know, government loosened the regulations on qualified donees, which means now large foundations in Canada that want to live their equity practices can start granting to small, you know, nonprofits if they choose to do that. And with the changes to T3010 form and the data we'll be collecting, we'll have a chance to perhaps monitor whether that decision we made to loosen those regulations has had the impact, which was all about trying to, you know, drive capital flow towards those that have been underfunded. When I think of my own work, an example of where we've taken data that has seemed unattainable and inaccessible and turned it into something that's made a difference, you know, working with a group of a circle of elder grandmothers in, you know, First Nations community in my province who didn't really know who was even in their ecosystem other than the people that they already knew, and their funders didn't know who was in the ecosystem. And so the same calls for funding went out to the same people over and over. There was a disparity starting already within these groups of, you know, Indigenous organizations. Being able to give them the data that helped them identify who was in arms in this work doing, and be able to say you have data that gives you all this information, and use that to say, you know, to work on indigenizing services to women and girls in Nova Scotia, just because we have a data set now who's working with Indigenous women and girls, and how do we go to them and make a difference from what we now know. And so that's what excites me about data. It's not just how we make decisions, it's about how we monitor the decision made. How do we make change continue to happen? One change is not going to change the world. You know, loosening regulations and on qualified donees and increasing the disbursement quota does nothing if people don't change their granting practices. So it's important for us to have data for those types of purposes.
Yeah, I think Kathy put into the chat, it can't be a one and done. But I wanted to go to Charles next just to learn a bit about your priorities and if you have any call to action for the audience as we wind down.
So yeah, it's so I think I'll just build on that. I mean, back to Kathy's point that it's not a one and done. So sustainability will be paramount. So just getting started with data is one thing. Sustaining it and continuing, because it's alive. And then security. We never got a chance to talk about cybersecurity or security today, but security of data, like, I mean, it is an asset. It is an important resource. And if you're going to be the custodian of it, you're going to be using it, you're going to be sharing it. It has to be done in ways that are safe. So I think we'll probably have to have another session like this to talk about how to keep yourself safe. But I would say, yes, the collaborate, but do it safely is what I would leave people with.
Love that. And I'll go to you next, Liz, just to get your thoughts on current priorities that you're working on and some call to action for the audience.
I feel like some last remarks were maybe current priorities and call to action. I think I maybe blended those two. But really, there is a lot going on. There are a lot of resources, a lot of capacity building supports, data sets that exist out there, and a lot of interesting work that's happening, and we lack the connections and the ability to navigate all of those things. And so being able to know what is out there and to be able to navigate it, that needs to be resourced. And so I really want to drive the point home and have conversations with other funders about how we need to better resource this ecosystem. And that's a question to ask for folks here to ask of their funders, is how you're actually resourcing us to do this work ourselves and to resource the ecosystem too.
Yeah, love that. And Karen, I'll come to you next, just for your maybe some call to action for the audience as well.
Yeah, so for sure, I would agree with a lot of what my co-panelists have said. I think the call to action is definitely for greater collaboration, greater sharing across our ecosystem. And of course, I agree that we need the funding to be able to do that. And I think generally, especially for smaller nonprofits, this is going to be a bit of a struggle, both from a data perspective, but as Charles mentioned, from a cybersecurity perspective. And we had our own fairly recent experience with the cyber breach that, up until that point, I would say we all felt maybe a little bit like a teenager, where we felt we were untouchable and why would they come after a nonprofit, like, right?
Yes.
So I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for us, is that, and it wasn't a privacy breach, just so people that, we didn't lose any of our client data. We don't collect a lot of personally identifiable information in our work. So, but having said that, it was enough of a wake-up call to say we absolutely are charged with protecting the information that is shared with us through those client interactions. And that is the same for many, many, many nonprofits across the country. But we do not either have the internal capacity, the funding, or, in some cases, the knowledge to be able to do that properly. And so 211 was very grateful to receive some funding through the Community Services Recovery Fund to develop a cybersecurity framework for the 211 system, but we have committed to sharing that back with the nonprofit sector at large. So again, hoping that those tools can be helpful to those who have not sort of started walking down this path yet.
Much appreciated. And yes, we'll round out the conversation with Kathy. Any closing thoughts or call to action for the community that's watching?
Well, I think I guess my call to action would be primarily to funders. I think that the risk for all funders, government, foundation, social impact investors, the whole gamut, is the desire that the challenge is the desire to fund a lot of people to do a lot of little things, which leaves the basic infrastructure lacking. And I think what is required to help all organizations do better in relation to collecting, using, securely storing data requires a significant investment in core infrastructure that will help all of us do that more effectively. And I remain concerned that the money is going to be distributed in small pockets everywhere and not have the kind of and that won't have the impact that will be needed. I'm also concerned about sustainability. I think the idea even of a an inventory of what's going on in terms of research and data. Those are great ideas. Lots of people could do it. That's not the problem. The problem is maintaining it, because once you, an inventory, as I said in the chat, an inventory is outdated the moment it's finished. It's outdated before it's even finished. So it only is useful if there's money to maintain it. And I speak as an organization that tried to maintain inventories of umpteen different things. And they all, 100% of them fall apart when the funding disappears.
Right. And again, I want to thank all of our panelists for your time, the remarkable leadership. And we always close the way that we began this conversation by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we still stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. I really want to thank the audience and the continued audience as this is recorded and shared for the long term. Thank you for being part of the People's Social Impact Conference. It still is going. This is just technically day one, but we started yesterday. We have another conversation in about an hour. So looking forward to seeing you then. And again, thank you for your diligence and your leadership. And to our panelists, we really appreciate this enlightened conversation. So let's keep the conversation going and take this learning and start to implement. So let's go from theory to action. So we shall see you soon. Thanks so much.